You're listening to eLearnChat, where talk is knowledge.
Hello and welcome to eLearnChat, our new podcast featuring prominent leaders, shakers and movers in the e-learning and training industry. Your co-hosts are Rick Zanotti and Terrence Wing.
Hi everyone, I'm Rick Zanotti, and this is eLearnChat, show number 22. And before we get started, let me introduce our co-host, Terrence Wing.
Thank you, Rick. Great being here again. 22. I love how that number just keeps rising and rising every week.
It's just rising and rising. And the viewership has actually gone down. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, yeah, 22. And to celebrate our 22nd show, we have two guests. I mean, this is pretty amazing. For the first time ever, we now have two guests versus one. So to introduce our guests, that's some crazy guest music.
Yes, I like it.
I like that song.
We've got Diane Smith and Coline Son-Lee. Hi, how are you guys?
Hey. Good morning.
They're from Yes Everest, and in fact, this is their website right here.
Looks like.
So how are you folks doing today?
We're great.
We're doing fantastic.
How are you this morning?
We are good.
Excellent.
We're good. Now, you guys are going to talk a little bit about project management.
Yeah, today we're going to talk about the 7 musts of project management, and it's our musts.
Your musts.
So it's not anything that you'll find in a book anywhere. It's stuff that we've put together in terms of our own experience with projects.
And we're talking must, not musty.
Yeah.
Right.
Things that you should do.
The must-dos.
The must-dos.
All right. Well, why don't we jump into it since we got 7 of them?
Okay.
Yep.
Well, sure. We don't think it'll take terribly long, but each one we feel is so important that you can't do any size project, learning project, any kind of project without addressing each one of these at some level.
So the first one we have is identifying and understanding your stakeholders. You really have to understand who your stakeholders are. It's important to understand what their roles are in your project. For example, you can have an initiator, and that's the person who first suggests or thinks about the particular product or service. You have your influencer, who's the person who influences or advises the buying decision. You have the decider, who that's the individual with the power and the final authority to make the ultimate choice with the product. You have your buyer, that's the person who concludes the transaction. And you have your user, the person who actually uses the product or service. So in terms of stakeholders, those are some of the roles that you want to consider when you're evaluating your stakeholders and your project. Other roles that you consider would be your SME, and they're very important because they help you define, for example, if it's a training effort that or a training initiative, then that would help. They're the ones that help you define what the scope of your project will be. So it's really important to understand and identify your stakeholders, and also in terms of what their expectations are, what the WIFM is for each of them, because each of them they each have a different WIFM, and they're going to impact your project in a different way. And you also have to understand what the business need is, because that's going to help define the scope and how that's connected to the scope of your project.
In fact, I'm putting on your Wordle right now so we can see all the different aspects of a project from beginning. Actually, when you look at the Wordle and you listen to all the stakeholders, it's amazing actually any project actually gets done.
Yeah.
Exactly. And again, before in the pre-show, we were talking about the reason we did the Wordle is because, a lot of project management books, they cover a lot of the methodology in a very linear manner.
Yeah, the initiate, plan, execute, monitor, control, and close. It's a straight line type thing.
And if you've never been involved in projects, or you have been involved in projects, you know that nothing happens in a linear fashion. So it can be a little bit misleading. So the Wordle is just to give an idea, a visual impact of what really goes on in a project. It's a lot of things happening simultaneously.
I've seen a lot of visual graphs of project management methodology that shows all these different parts pointing to each other and back and forth and all this other stuff. And we found that the best way to really visualize it is in the Wordle, because it's just a mishmash. You really have to address it all, and you have to address it all at the same time. So when Coline was talking about the different stakeholders, the best way to think of that is, what do they need? What is their buy-in? What do they want out of your project? And this is for e-learning, for instructional design, this is for building a skyscraper, anything. Everybody has their own self-interests when it comes to your project. So you have to find out what is their interest, how do you get that to work for your project, and how do you continue working with that throughout the project?
Well, you know, this reminds me of, I didn't bring it today, I forgot to digitize it, but I have an old cartoon that was the project management flowchart. And at the end of it, it says, praise for the non-participants and blame of the innocent. That was one of my favorite little cartoons. It was so accurate.
Yeah.
So
and
how do you not get overwhelmed with the amount of stakeholders that potentially, if you get too carried away, I mean, you can almost put the entire world into your project if you don't at some point gauge it and say, you know, hey, this is where the end of our stakeholder community ends?
That's a very important question, because you can get overwhelmed. I mean, if you really think about it, the entire world is your stakeholder. If you want to get down to that kind of a detail, you have to decide how much of it can affect your project in a positive or a negative way. So you have to decide, okay, is this stakeholder the final say-so? Are they the user? Okay, well, if they're the user, then they have a pretty strong say-so in how this project is going to be accepted. And the other thing is, okay, if you have somebody way down the line, okay, they might be affected by somebody else who's using the program. So now you have an indirect stakeholder. How important is their needs to the project? So you kind of have to balance that and decide how much will it impact your project negatively or how much it will impact your project positively, and either decide then that there's somebody you're going to deal with or not.
Yeah, you basically have to prioritize the stakeholders in terms of who has the most impact on the project. So your sponsor will be a key stakeholder. The end user, if it's training, will be a key stakeholder. And then you have other secondary stakeholders that may not have as high of an impact on the outcome of the project. So then you focus more on your key stakeholders and how they impact the project versus the ones that have less impact or can adversely affect the outcome.
We had a comment here in the on the Twitter feed where somebody's saying they prefer the word parties over stakeholders. Are we playing with semantics there, or is there any value in really looking at the word stakeholders, or does it really matter?
Personally, I don't think that there's a big problem with calling them parties that are involved, second and first parties, or stakeholders. I like using stakeholders to me because it means to me that they actually have a stake in what's involved. Mm-hmm. So I like to use stakeholders because they do have a part of this. They're either going to be affected by it, or they're creating it, or they're purchasing it, or they're going to approve it. So to me, they all have a stake. So I like to use stakeholders. And
stakeholder makes me hungry, actually. That's the primitive mind talking. So
it really matters what you call them, though. It's kind of like, when you go in retail, they call them team members, or they call them customer service reps or whatever. I think it's just, it doesn't really matter. Once you know that you have to identify the people, the key players or team or party or whatever within your project.
But you can call them project detractors, detours, and obstacles.
Exactly.
Some of them can be.
So the next one, we can move on. The next must, we think, that's important in a project, support and authority for your project. It's really important that you make sure that you get the proper sign-off authorizing the project, because if you don't get that authorization, then what's going to happen is you're going to end up in one of those perpetual, never-ending cycles of not sure what you're doing, not sure who you're reporting to, not sure who the sponsor is, not sure what the objectives are for the project, what the outcome should be. So it's really important that you get the proper sign-off to authorize you as the project manager and authorizing the project as a whole. And the other thing that's really important about that is making sure that you get buy-in from your stakeholders and your SMEs. So you want to get the support of your SMEs, you want to get the support of the other stakeholders, and you want to make sure that you have the authority to be able to move forward with your project.
That's good. And you know, it's interesting because initially when you start a project, you've got everything defined and you know who everybody is, and then they change.
Yes.
There's always that fun part where you're in the middle of doing a project and your stakeholders become somebody else and the budgets change and the people change. And that's the joy and fun of doing stuff like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one of the bigger dangers of projects because they don't usually last 10 minutes. So if you have a project that's going to last a week, it's very possible that somebody goes on vacation and doesn't know about your project, or it could last a year and the management changes. And unless you have something that delineates what the real business need is, sometimes they call this a project charter, but sometimes it's just a piece of an email that says, hey, this is why we want to do this. This is why it's important to our company. So then you hand that to the next person who's in line of that management that changed hands and say, okay, this is why we started this. Do you still agree with this need? Can we continue with this project? And you get that. That's the support and authority that you need for every project.
Right. And you know, it's interesting because a lot of times when you first get into a project and then there's a change, let's say there's a change in management, a lot of people think everything is status quo. Brand new game. And the minute you have a new manager, your project is in jeopardy. And a lot of people, you know, especially newbie people who've never done this before, don't realize that new management means everything could change.
Yes.
And
it doesn't have to be the person in charge of the project either, the person who was the original sponsor.
Right.
It could be his manager or somebody even higher up the chain that just decided to change the whole where the business wants to go. So that changes everybody's priorities.
Yeah, that's true. How's the chat room doing, Terrence?
Gaining that support, because that support is sometimes not just simply given, even from the person who assigned you the project.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
We had one project where the person who was supporting the project wasn't even the person who would be buying the project, and it was somebody higher up that was supporting it, and it was somebody lower down in the organizational chart that would be the buyer, and the communication there was lost, and the project was basically dumped because the communication didn't happen.
Right.
Yeah, which is why when we first started talking, it was really important for me to communicate in terms of identifying the initiator, the influencer, the decider, the buyer, and the user, because for us as consultants, we think that the influencer is the person who's going to make the final decision about whether they procure our services or not, whether they move forward with the project. And sometimes the influencer isn't the buyer, and you have to get the buyer on board. And sometimes you can spend a lot of time and effort chasing down the influencer, and then you realize that this person is not the one that's going to be making the final decision in terms of sign off for the project. So it's really important to identify those different roles and determine who you have to put a lot more effort into to get buy-in from them.
That's true. And by the way, for all of those of you who are listening and watching, I've talked quite a bit with Coline and Diane, and Diane does have an accent. She is from the U.S., so that happens. Just ignore that.
That's a good one, Rick.
From the East Coast.
From the East Coast. Well, actually, we're all from the East Coast.
There
Terrence grew up in New York. I grew up in New York. And were you from New York, too?
I was from upstate New York.
Upstate New York.
Yeah, we're upstate.
Where upstate? North of Albany.
What's the town?
Oh, a little town called Cambridge.
Okay. I went to school up in upstate New York. Well, not as far as Albany, but I was in school in Poughkeepsie.
Oh, that's funny because my mother lives in Kingston, right across the river.
Oh, yep. I know it well. Many a keg brought me across the river.
Yeah, so we're talking about support and authority, getting support for your project so that if the management changes or if something changes, you still have that reason, that business need to continue your project. The last thing you want to do is to have it yanked out from under you.
That's true. Now, both of you have done different things. You're doing project management and e-learning and training and all sorts of other things. But prior to that, you have interesting backgrounds. Diane, I think you worked emergency.
I was in law enforcement for the better part of 20 years in the 911 room, training dispatchers, and I've done some training with the Attorney General's office, and I've also done some officer training in more than just one department. So like Los Angeles Airport Police, I've done some training down there.
Interesting.
And done a lot of mostly software training.
And those are large projects where all sorts of good stuff can go on. And Coline, you were in, if I recall correctly, you were in construction at one point.
Yes, that's how I got my my taste of project management. I've worked on several large projects, mostly in petrochemical construction. I worked on a methanol plant, which at the time of construction had the largest metric ton capacity in the world. And that was like a $500 million project that took about 2 years. And at the time, I was functioning as a logistics manager. That was actually my career at that time, was logistics and supply chain management.
So this is a lot more boring, actually.
Actually more exciting.
Is it really? because when you talk construction, you've got so many dependencies, so many variables, so many supplier issues. When you're doing something like software, you tend to have much better control of the process than all the external possibilities that could go wrong with, let's say, a construction or even any kind of law enforcement project where there's so many more inputs to what goes on.
And I can give you an example. For example, there was the project that I was working on at the time, that methanol plant that I just mentioned. A lot of the machinery and equipment was ordered and built in Europe and shipped to Trinidad, which is where I was at the time and which is where the plant was built. And there was a hurricane in the Atlantic. So for 2 weeks, we had no idea. We couldn't get in contact through the shipping agent. We couldn't get in contact with the ship's captain to determine where his location was or if they sank or whatever the case may be. And you're talking about equipment that took, over a 5-year period to design and engineer and build and then finally get on the ship. So that was a very uncertain time there for us because we had 2 weeks where we had no idea what was going on. So it can be very nerve-wracking. You're looking at, about when you're downtime, you're looking at about $1 million a day. It's costing you to run a project and you can't work. And there are other things to consider too. For example, the weather. That was a tropical island. And so for like 6 months out of the year, it rained. So sometimes it would rain and you had to just send everyone home. So you couldn't do anything. So.
And then when you have the crane operators, you have gigantic cranes. And every day that they're not working, it's like $1 million down, isn't it?
So it's pretty.
I thought I recognized a little bit of a Trinidadian accent in your voice.
Just a little bit, huh?
A little bit. Yeah, now my family is from Jamaica, so I recognize a teeny bit of it now.
A teeny bit of it. It's
Terrence, that was a good Irish accent almost.
Was it Irish more than Jamaican?
I don't know, it sounded Jamaican to me, man.
It's funny, Terrence, that you say that because I don't know in your experience, but for me, because I'm actually from the islands, I get a lot of people who think that there's just this one huge melting pot, but we all have our own identity, Trinidadians, Jamaicans, etc. And the word mon that the Jamaicans tend to punctuate their sentences with, I get that a lot when people talk to me. They say, "How's it going, mon?" I'm like, "I'm not Jamaican. What are you talking about?"
And at that point, she kicks you.
And you have a friend who's Barbadian.
Yeah, he's from Barbados. So.
Yeah, it's the same. I think with Latinas in that they're very proud of whether they're from Mexico or whether they're from South America or whether they're from Spain. It's they're all distinct cultures, as well as Jamaica, Trinidad, Nevis. I mean, all those islands are separate countries with their own unique cultures. There's some overlap, clearly, but their histories are all unique.
And see, we've succeeded in distracting you from your project list.
Oh yeah, I see that.
We're those
I think we're on number
distractors.
3.
Number 3.
Oh, we're on number 3.
Number 3 is resources. You really have to deal with your resources. Of course, you know some of your resources will be your money, your budget, and keeping within your budget. That's basic project management. You also have your time. Of course, you want to do your schedule, your resource availability, what is their schedules, but you also need to know the who's on your project. Who are the people that are going to be on your project? How many people are going to be on your project? What is their expertise, and will they need training to do your project? So it's very possible they need to increase their skills or even learn a whole new program to work on your project. So you have to schedule that training or that learning curve into your project to accommodate that. Some of the other things you have to consider are the tools that you're going to need. What software will work best? I know that with Rick, you're using Captivate a lot. Is that correct?
We use Captivate. We use Lectora, Articulate, whatever the customer wants and whatever we feel is a good choice for the particular project.
So you know what your customer wants to use, so you have to make sure you have those programs available to use, and the lead time to get those things, and whatever it is that you need, any kind of equipment that you have to have for any special project, you have to make sure that those are all taken into account. How long it's going to take to get there, how long it's going to take to get online, how long it's going to do that learning curve to use that new equipment for your project. All these things have to be accounted for when you're scheduling your time and your cost and your people. Vacation time, sick time, is somebody pregnant, do they have family events that they have to be to? All these things have to be accounted for when you're scheduling your resources.
And then you also have to think about the triple constraint when you're in a project. And the triple constraint is the time, cost, and quality, and how you balance those. So for example, you have a client or you're internal in an organization, and they tell you, we need to have this e-learning training designed by the end of next week. Well, then there's a budget for that, and so they've given you a time, and there's the cost and the quality. So you can say, can I compromise on one or the other? Can I spend a whole lot more money? I'll need, instead of $10,000, I'll need $50,000 or whatever to get this done by next Friday. So the triple constraint is just, manipulating your time, your cost, and your quality to accommodate.
Yeah. I like to tell people, you have a choice: cheap, fast, or good. Pick 2.
Well, usually they want good, cheap, and fast.
No, you can only pick 2.
You only get 2.
You only get 2. So you can have it good and fast, but it's not going to be cheap.
Yeah. Yeah, that's usually, I know a lot of times when you go into a project and people say how much, and you give them a number and they go, that's too much. And they go, we want it really high quality, looks like a Steven Spielberg movie, but we want it for $5,000.
Right.
Good luck with that.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Yep. Good luck. And we know a lot of people who would actually take a project like that on. We'll give them their names. So.
And it doesn't usually come out as cheap, I'm sure.
It doesn't, no.
Or maybe it looks cheap.
That's true. And by the way, just out of an interesting aside, we all have someone in common that we know. And indirectly, I met Terrence through Trish Yule.
Yes.
And you folks work with Trish Yule.
Yes, we do.
Which we didn't know when I first met Coline, that you folks were actually working with her. So it's kind of an interesting aside in how, with social media or whatever, we have kind of indirectly all come to the same source, which is Trish. She's actually controlling the planet, but we don't want to tell people.
Yes, she is actually.
So in light of that, we should all give Trish Yule a shout out.
That's right.
Hey, Trish!
Hello, Trish.
Hey, Trish.
We love you.
Now you're both also CPLPs as well?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And PMPs, project management professionals.
And PMPs.
How do you manage all the initials?
ABCs?
Now, how do you manage all those initials?
Have some more. I'm trying to find a credential where there's a Z in there, because I pretty much have the P's and the C's and the pretty much taken care of at this point.
Yeah,
I think
if you have
that's-
enough letters inside your, at the end of your title, it's going to start doing this to your name. I'm showing the name going down like that, all the weight.
Yeah, all the letters are on the back side of the name.
I'll probably drop some of them off, the ones that I don't use too often.
I've seen some people with business cards that they have their name and then all the letters underneath.
That's right. That's right. And it's interesting. While the titles are interesting, I also wonder sometimes if that scares people in terms of, oh, they must cost a lot of money. I can't use them. Especially when you see 4 or 5 different accreditations right underneath a name. Sometimes it gets too much, or people wonder, okay, what are all these accreditations? You guys have pretty normal ones, but there's some out there that have 5, 6, 8 in a row. That's probably,
Could depend on the industry.
What are abnormal ones?
What are abnormal
I don't
ones,
know.
for example?
I don't know. What would be an abnormal one? I can't think of any right now. But I'm sure there are some.
ZANOTTI.
See, okay. We're going back to music for Terrence. Here we go.
We were wondering if you can play that.
Okay.
All right,
so
number 4.
Number four.
Number
four.
4 is quality. And a lot of people get quality confused with what is commonly called grade. When you go to the grocery store and you get your grade A eggs, everyone thinks, oh, it's high quality eggs. No, there's a big difference between quality and grade. Quality is just how the end product fits the requirements, how well it is fit for the purpose it was designed for. That's quality. Grade is the multiple functional technical characteristics. So if you want to compare, let's say, a Volkswagen Beetle from 1978 and a 2010 Mercedes-Benz, okay? They're both cars. They both have wheels. They have engines. They'll get you from point A to point B, sometimes reliably or sometimes not so reliably. But that's the difference between quality. Getting it to do it what it's supposed to do is quality. Now, when you get in behind the wheel of a Volkswagen Bug 1978 and you get behind the wheel of a Mercedes-Benz 2010, you're going to see the dashboard and the seating arrangements and your steering wheel and your transmission, your navigation. All of that's going to be very different. That's grade. So when you're designing your project and you're deciding what should be the end product, you have to decide what is the fitness for use, what needs to be done to make it work the way it should. That is quality, and you have to plan that in. How are you going to measure that? How are you going to make sure that happens at the end of the game?
And the other thing to add to that is, for example, people say things like, well, I'll know it when I see it. You can't do that. You have to actually plan quality ahead. When you're planning your project, you can't just create something and hope that it meets the requirements.
Right, and quality equals customer satisfaction more often than not.
Yes.
Exactly.
Very much so. It's the difference between being a rejected project and an accepted project.
Yep. And the higher the quality, usually the higher the customer satisfaction. Though in the e-learning arena, not always. I remember there was a company, I believe it was Hilton, who did back in the probably about mid-90s, maybe, they did a complete Star Trek e-learning course. I think it cost them over $1 million, if not $2 million. They had all the actors from Star Trek back then. They spent a fortune on it, and guess what? By the time it was done, the requirements changed. And it got thrown out. And I know Hilton, I believe, since then has recouped and done other things with e-learning. But that was a lot of the misconception back then, that e-learning had to be a massive, major motion picture production.
Right.
And it doesn't. And the requirements change so quickly that you just can't do it sometimes. I know we do a lot of work with software simulations. And what happens when you do software simulations for companies that are very fluid, they don't even want voiceover, because by the time you do your voiceover, do the edits, maybe in a month, everything changed again. And what if you can't find the same voiceover talent? All of that can really make a difference to what we're doing. And so it changes a little bit in the e-learning arena because of the nature of the beast. And the higher quality equals higher costs, especially in today's economy, probably is not the way a lot of people want to go. Or the misnomer of, quality equals massive motion picture production budget. No, it doesn't.
Exactly.
Because unless you have something you're teaching that's never going to change, you're going to run into a rapidly changing business world. And the software training, if you spent a fortune on it, may wind up getting discarded very, very quickly.
And you bring up a very important point. Quality does not mean fancy schmancy. All it means is, does it meet the purpose it was designed for? You can do, I don't know, a Captivate animated video or something if you wanted to in e-learning. You can do a PowerPoint slide. If it fits the purpose, you really have to decide, okay, how much do we need to put in to accomplish what we need to?
Right.
That's what you're looking for when you're designing in your quality. And sometimes it's just a matter of using the right colors. Sometimes it's using plain white slides with some text on it. Sometimes it is the full-blown Star Trek motion picture production.
Right.
It doesn't have to be. What is it you're trying to achieve? What do you need to do to get there? That's what you want to do. And it's not so much is it the video that's teaching anything, but what is the content? So you have to really decide what is it that you're trying to achieve and how can you make it happen.
Right.
In many cases, I know a lot of times when I'm stepping into a project, that's one of the first steps I try to determine is, what is the end product supposed to look like? And part of what it's supposed to look like are those quality parameters too. And if I can't define that, then the project is really destined for doom from the start. So in many cases with instructional design, if you're not looking at those parameters before you put pen to paper or fingers to keypad, it could be putting you on a path to disaster.
It could.
Exactly.
You can get so tied up with putting in all the clicky bling bling, like Cami says, that you lose track of what it is you're trying to achieve. And that kind of brings up gold plating, putting in too much, something that's not required, and putting gold plating on your steering wheel or something.
Yeah, something that you think the customer might like, but it's costing you to put it in, then that's gold plating.
The distracting, shining objects.
But now, I will play a little devil's advocate too, because I know a lot of there just seems to be a lot of talk about curbing the Star Trek type bling that goes into some e-learning, and I think it can be just as damaging not putting some of that into e-learning too, because it's so easy, it's so cheap, and it's so accessible to use tools that do it, that in many cases it could be instructional design or laziness for just not putting it in there. And people, because we're so accustomed to seeing it on YouTube, we're seeing 10-year-old kids designing green screen effects. So in many ways, there's almost no reason to not use these things. They should be used. They just should be used appropriately, and they shouldn't detract from the learning.
Yeah,
exactly.
You bring up a real important point, and that kind of goes back to knowing who are your stakeholders. How much do they need? Now, when you're doing adult learning, you do have to have a level of interactivity. You have to bring up prior knowledge so that they can start melding that with the new knowledge. So you do have to do a lot of research on who are the end users and what will they be needing to accomplish what they need to learn. So the clicky bling bling, as Cami Bean calls it, or the flashy stuff, whatever, is that helping or is it just fluff? So you have to balance that to come up with the quality.
And that brings us to what, number 5?
Number 5.
Yeah, just before we do number 5, do we have any questions, Terrence? Is any
Nope, not yet. Just you got Mary Beth is tweeting your tips into eLearnChat hashtag, and right now everybody's tentatively listening. So I'll throw you a question if one pops in there.
Awesome. The next thing, number 5, is communication and soft skills. And the thing about this list is not that it's necessarily ordered. We just put 7 things on the list. Communication should be somewhere closer to the top.
This is a good place to show the Wordle again.
Oh, yeah, good place to show the Wordle.
Wordle is up.
It's about being proactive, and it's about motivating your team as the project manager. And it's also about understanding the WIFM for each individual on the team, because some of us, we have intrinsic motivation and some of us have extrinsic motivation. Some of us are motivated by money. Some of us are just content with doing a job well done. And as a project manager, it's really important for you to understand the WIFM of each of your team players or your party or stakeholders or whatever you want to call them. And it's also about being able to say no. And it's very difficult for us to say no. I was reading somewhere that with Facebook and all this other stuff, that we all always want people to like us. And it's getting a little bit more difficult, more challenging to be able to say no. But sometimes it's important to say no, because if you don't know how to say no, you're setting yourself up and you're setting your project up for failure, because you may be asked to do something that's unreasonable given the time or the budget or the resources that you have available. And you have to be able to tell your sponsor or your client or your boss or whomever, this is not possible with what you're giving me, or no, it can't be done. And
or saying, we can, but you have to give us more money, or yes, we can, but you have to give us more time or more people. So you have to make sure that you are keeping everything in the open, that everyone understands what's going on.
And a lot of that setting expectations right at the beginning, so that
Exactly.
you don't have any of the surprises, that when you're doing something, it makes sense for everybody right up front. A lot of times what happens, and this is the typical bad bait and switch, where a vendor will come in and give you a lowball estimate, and then the minute the project starts, all of a sudden the estimate goes up quadruple.
yeah.
And that's bad project management. It's also a scammy way to do business, and it happens a lot.
Yeah, you start getting a flood of change orders.
And then, of course, the vendor doesn't realize why they're not being used anymore by
Now,
that.
the true. I'm sorry, I lost sound there for a second. The true art in saying no is actually never having to say no. So a lot of that lies in not the ability to say no, but the ability to ask the right questions, so that the people on the other side of the table convince themselves that they don't want to go that route.
Or
And
the choices of yeses.
the choice of yeses. That comes back to understanding who your stakeholders are and what they want, way back to the beginning of what we were talking about. And also going back to when you're a project manager or you're managing a project, you don't even have to be titled project manager. You don't expect yourself to remember everybody's preferences if they want to be emailed, telephone called, tweeted, or whatever they want to be updated on stuff. You need to have it written down. Okay, does Joe want to make sure that everything's on time? Does Bob want to make sure that everything is on budget? What are their interests involved in this? And making sure they're informed all the time. And the other thing, like Coline was saying, is being proactive. Don't wait for the problems to find you. Go out and look for them. Go out and make sure that you are looking for what's going on, any kind of delay, any kind of snag that is either happening or has happened that hasn't proven to be a problem just yet, but could. You really have to be on top of it all the time.
And the good news is that the problems will find you regardless.
They will,
yeah, they
but
will.
you don't want to wait till they find you.
No.
And another thing with communication is also being able to have a seat at the table, being able to demonstrate the value of whatever workplace learning and performance initiative that you're undertaking, whether it's training or e-learning or HPI or social media, being able to defend or communicate the benefits to the organization. And again, knowing how your stakeholders, as Diane said, knowing how your stakeholders prefer to be communicated to.
What's HPI?
Human performance
Oh,
improvement.
okay. I'll make sure.
And it's really important to really communicate well with your SMEs, because they can make or break your project.
Yes.
And a lot of the time, in my experience, SMEs just want to be recognized for their input, for their values. So you get buy-in from them, and you recognize what contribution they made to the project. The sixth one, because I know we're running out of time, is risk management, which is really important. Risk is something that is identified, and it may or it may not happen, and it can be a threat or an opportunity. A lot of people, when they think of risk, they think of it as something negative. It can be something that can happen, positively impact your project. You have to recognize it and be able to jump on it. And risk management is just basically avoiding things that can go wrong. Sorry, it's about avoiding things going wrong by planning for it. So you plan for by being proactive, basically.
A lot of people think that risk managers are pessimists because they think of everything that could go wrong.
They're realists.
They're realists, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They are cousins to Murphy.
Yep.
And they understand Murphy can come home to visit anytime.
Well, my favorite corollary was that Murphy was an optimist.
Oh.
Murphy's an optimist.
So, risk management is about controlling the project and not having the project control you. It's about eliminating uncertainties. If you're
identifying them.
if you're uncertain, if you're uncertain about something, then that reduces your confidence in whatever that thing is. So if you have a team member that's supposed to be, really well at Captivate and you're not sure about it, then that's an uncertainty. And then you need to explore that and probe deeper, because that could be a possible risk to your project. And also, they said that about 90% of the threats identified and investigated ahead of time can be eliminated when you do your risk management on your projects.
In the project management body of knowledge, they call this risk identification. And what you want to do is make sure that you are accepting that things can go wrong. Don't go in there thinking everything's going to be great, the best case scenario. Don't go there. Go in there with the worst case scenario. What's the worst that could happen? What are we going to do about it when it does happen? How much is it going to cost to take care of that? And is it going to...
So let's do number 7.
Number 7 is lessons learned, which is probably what we're going to talk about when we finish the show. What worked? What didn't work? What could have been done better? And how do you move that forward to your next projects? You want to, during your communications and your stakeholders and everything else, you want to talk to people about prior projects that were a lot like yours so that you can take that information into planning yours. And so you also want to document from your project what went right, what went wrong, so that you can move that forward to the next project. Mm-hmm. That's lessons learned, because the pain that you suffered through this project, you don't want to live through again. You want to have the benefits of what you've learned from, both positive and negative, so that you don't have to live through that pain twice.
Right. And that's it, pretty much.
That's our 7. And
right.
We have that little cartoon that we put together.
Yeah, I know Rick had showed it earlier, but with the technical problems, I don't know if he's going to be successful at showing it
I
again.
can show you the cartoon. Here we go. There's the cartoon.
Yeah, you'll see a bunch of different aspects of how things were communicated and what the end results were.
And the different roles and their perception of what the objectives and the expectations were.
And the very bottom there is lessons learned. And that's probably one of the biggest mistakes people can make in projects, is not documenting their lessons learned.
Is there some place that, because the feed may not be very clear on that, is there some place that the viewers can go to see that cartoon?
Yeah, I think the link is at the bottom. There's a
link
URL.
Mm-hmm.
That's and Diane and I put that together. So if they go to that link, it should bring up that
cartoon.
The cartoon.
So if
Okay.
maybe either Rick wants to type that in someplace.
Yeah, well, we'll tweet it. I'm
We'll
waiting
tweet
for
it
him
out. I think
to
it's gonna be
put it
easier.
back up again.
Okay.
Yeah, we're using Wirecast for the shows. Most of the time it works pretty well, but I notice every so often something goes wrong. I was getting random shots coming up. That's fun.
Random shots of what? I'm curious.
Random shots of what? 'Cause
Oh,
we
the
can't-
different shots we have, like for example, websites that we have posted, our video feeds, and it was randomly going to different ones, and that was really weird. That's never happened before.
Well, we do have one question from Lily, and she's asking, how do you document your lessons remembered?
The lessons learned. There's many different ways people do this. We have a file system on our server that each project has its own lessons learned. So if you say, oh, you remember we did this on such and such project, you go up and this is a similar project. You want to make sure your notes are on projects so that when you're doing a similar project, you can say, oh, okay, let's look and see what we did on this one that worked or didn't work. The other thing you can do is keep a project journal that where you have a constant list of things that you've done during that project, so you can go back to it and say, oh, hey, that worked really well. So when you have your lessons learned meeting with your team, you can each bring your journal and say, hey, I remember this back in the beginning of the project, and that didn't seem to gel with me too well. So you can discuss those things as you go along. I find it best to keep both the project journal and documenting them by project, so that when you are doing something, you can recall them both ways. Yeah.
I know that was one of the things that while I was in the military, it was part of the culture. Everything you did, every mission you went on, training, real life, it didn't matter. If you went on a mission afterwards, everybody gathered around. I was in the infantry, so we gathered around a sand table, and we showed exactly what went on, what happened that was great, what happened that was wrong, and it was religious in that, you know, it was part of the process. You knew your mission wasn't over until you conducted your after action review.
Exactly, and I think that's where the project management got it was from the after action review.
Another thing to think about also is if you're doing a project with multiple vendors, make sure you do your lessons learned with all those vendors as well, because and at the beginning of your project, encourage them to keep their own lessons learned, because I've seen some projects, there's one up the street actually from us right now, where a contractor did some building, and then later on they had to modify that building to put in some new construction, and somehow that communication on what happened during the first project didn't get communicated to the new project, and they're running into all kinds of problems now. That's that bridge.
Oh, okay.
That bridge. They're doing some under construction on a bridge, and it's just falling apart. So somehow the lessons learned didn't communicate. So when you're working with vendors, make sure you talk with them too about what they learned.
And we also have some resources here as well, helpful books that for individuals who aren't hardcore into the project management, they're in workplace learning and performance, and they just need some sort of a guidance or a helpful way of getting their projects done. This one is called 10 Steps to Successful Project Management, and it's through the ASTD Press. And it was written by Lou Russell. And there's another one here.
And this one is awesome for anyone who's in the learning field, creating e-learning or instructional design.
You want to back it up just a tad?
Pardon me?
You want to bring it back just a little bit? Okay, I mean, it's the whole book cover. Okay.
Yeah, that's Project Management for Trainers. Again, ASTD Press, Lou Russell. Fantastic book. And no, we're not getting any money by endorsing these books. They're just really awesome resources. And then the last one here is, if you need help with your soft skills, it's Emotional Intelligence for Project Managers. And that's by AMA, American Management Association. That's a really wonderful book to add to your library as well.
You know, that's an interesting point too, because it seems like nowadays, I don't know if it's a nature of the workforce, but a lot more emotion than there used to be. And I guess that's also some of the things we have to manage, is the emotional side of everything.
Well, it's not so much the emotional side, it's understanding. I mean, it's not like people are going to blow up or they're going to cry on the spot.
But they will. That's another issue, yeah.
That's a different issue. But what we're finding is the new work environment, this is a knowledge environment now. It used to be industrial. You bring people out of the fields, they work in a factory, they do what you tell them to, and that's the end of the day. Well, now the competitive environment in the business field now is the actual intelligence and innovation within every single worker. So you have to motivate them and understand how they work in order to get that innovative spirit out of them. So in order to do that, you have to make sure you're dealing with them as people instead of machines.
I just want to comment here. Mary Beth had a really great comment about that a group wiki would be a great documenting tool for lessons learned. I agree with her 100%. And then Larry Straining, looks like he had a question here. Are you using social media in either your debriefing or in the tracking of your project management?
We do social media more so in our training and initiatives in our projects. Social media can be used an awful lot for the project management. I don't know that we've broached that.
No, we actually haven't.
But the wiki idea is a wonderful idea. You can also use a more archaic form, the issue log, which is more of a database where people put their issues in and people answer to those, how you can answer them. So yeah, a wiki or a forum, even a blog of sorts, Yammer would work very well for that type of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I think that puts us pretty much at the top of the hour, Rick.
It does. It does. There's our top of the hour music.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I still haven't heard back from our potential guest for next week, so I don't know what our topic is going to be next week. But I had Larry said he might step in for us if we need somebody. So either we'll be talking about gaming or we'll be talking about, actually both of them are gaming, because Larry is talking about World of Warcraft and how you can use that to train on leadership skills. So that would be pretty exciting when we have him on. Or it's going to be Alicia Sanchez on gaming. So thank you both for coming. Do you have anything that you'd like to promote before we close the show?
Well, one of the things that we're doing right now with Trish is the CPLP talk, and
that's on Twitter.
That's on Twitter, and it's to help those individuals who are preparing for the CPLP exam
and for recertification.
Now, is that at CPLP Talk?
Yes,
correct, at CPLP Talk.
Okay.
So we would encourage anyone who's a ASTD or who's considering certifying as CPLP to join the talks. They're every other Tuesday at, I believe, 5:30 Pacific time. And we're also going to be at ASTD ICE in Orlando. So if anyone wants to connect, that'd be awesome.
Great. I'll be looking for you both then, because I'll be there as well.
Perfect.
Great.
Wonderful.
And I'll be thinking of all of you, because I'm not going there. I'd like to.
Lucky you. One trip to Orlando this year already, huh?
Yep. No, I've just got too much work right now through about mid-June, and after that, if they move ICE about a month, it'd be great. But unfortunately, this time I can't make it. Next time.
Wonderful.
I like
thanks
Orlando.
for having us. We really enjoyed being on the show. Thank you, and thanks for all the people who joined in the Twitter and
thank you for the comments,
had questions and comments.
Sounds great. And with that, we're going to bid adieu to everybody, and we will see you all next week. Thanks again, Diane, Coline, for being here today, and we will talk real soon. Terrence, till next time.
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper. I can do that with my hands. There we go. Live long and prosper.
Yeah.
Have a good one, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.